A question that I get asked a lot is, why domestic violence? Why do you want to take on so many domestic violence cases? Why do you want to help people who have been accused of that? And, it all goes back to the very first domestic violence case that I ever had. My name is Veronica. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Los Angeles, and I help people who have been arrested put their criminal cases behind them so that they can enjoy their lives and their freedom. And this video is going to be about that very first domestic violence case I had that inspired me to want to help people who are accused of domestic violence. Okay, so about 10 years ago, I was a baby attorney, and I was assigned this divorce case. And my client was really nice, no criminal history, nothing like that. He and his wife, after having 2 kids, things just didn't work out. He had already moved out. It had been, about 4 to 6 months since then. They were separated. It was pretty clear that they were not going to get back together. And that whole time, they had just been sort of informally splitting custody 50-50. You have some special event you want to take the kids to, sure. It was great. Co-parenting, all good. But, he realized, okay, this is permanent. She's living in the house right now. I should take some steps, file this divorce. And so I was expecting, as a baby attorney at the time, that, okay, well, this is a matter. We have 2 good parents here. They're already splitting custody 50-50. They can just continue doing that. And then it's just a matter of math, right? Split up the assets, split up the debts. That's it. It should be pretty simple. Maybe we just go to a mediator, just get this whole thing done peacefully, cheaply. Okay, so we file the divorce petition, and we also send her a letter that explained, okay, here's the breakdown of everything. And the house had been his originally, so she was not going to be getting probably as much as she would have hoped out of the house, just because of the way that that's calculated. But we weren't even really negotiating at this point. We weren't shooting high and, trying to meet somewhere in between. We made a fair offer based on the law and based on simple math. So my client and I, yes, naively, I know now, thought, okay, this should be pretty quick. Well, the response to that letter was my client calling me frantically, telling me that he had been served with a domestic violence restraining order. And the hearing date was about 21 days away, so 21 days, and the restraining order said that he couldn't see his kids for that whole time. His ex, of course, he didn't care if he sees her or not, but he couldn't see his kids that whole time. And I was like, well, domestic violence, what is she talking about? Did something happen? What is she talking about? And so I look at the paperwork and I start researching, and it became very clear that what happened is that she had gone to a divorce attorney once she got our paperwork, who had advised her to file a domestic violence restraining order, because the way that this works is if you have a domestic violence restraining order in place, there is a rebuttable presumption that it is not in the best interest of the children to be with the abusing party. So if there's a finding of domestic violence, and that would have included an arrest or whatever, but he had never been arrested, in my opinion, because no domestic violence had ever occurred. And so now all of a sudden I have a client who can't see his kids for at least 21 days, and he is just a wreck over that. I mean, he loves these girls. And this is the kind of father who you can be a good father, I think, without doing this, but he would go way above and beyond. He was taking the girls he would come up with, okay, it's Harry Potter week. Let's go. We'll read this Harry Potter book together, and then we'll go to Harry Potter World, and we'll all dress up. And he was just so involved, and he loved being a dad, loves being a dad, loved it so much, and he was just so shaken up and so shocked that this would happen, that he couldn't see his girls. And, can I say 100% that there was no domestic violence? I suppose not. But if this was such a sweet and gentle man, he The police had never been called whatsoever in their entire relationship. And this was the kind of guy that, is more passive. His wife was much more of the strict, domineering type, which of course doesn't mean that she couldn't be a victim of domestic violence, but I just don't see it. And I participated in the whole, I'll also say, I don't know if I was as much then, but I've been doing this for about 10 years. And at this point, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character. And especially when I'm dealing with clients in really stressful situations, many times the way that they behave toward me is somewhat telling. And that doesn't mean, I guess this guy could be a total psychopath and just able to conceal it really well, but I don't think so. I really don't think so. I do not believe for 1 second anything that was being alleged against him. So we get to the hearing, and we finally get to the hearing day, right? So the 21 days have passed, we're at the hearing, and because of the court's calendar, the hearing had to be continued, which means that the restraining order stays in place. So for a few more weeks now, he cannot see the girls. And what was the point of all of this? Why file after, 4 to 6 months, everything is going well. There is no event that happened where she suddenly felt the need for a restraining order. Nothing happened. She agrees, nothing new happened. Why do it? The reason is that I think what she figured out from looking at our paperwork is that she wasn't going to get very much child support. She wasn't necessarily entitled to alimony as long as he had 50-50 custody. She was not going to get much child support. But if she can get more than 50-50 custody, now perhaps she can get more child support. It would give her, instead of the default 50-50, now suddenly she would have a leg up in the divorce. That, I will believe until my dying day, is the absolutely only reason why she filed that. And in fact, I've spoken to that attorney since then, who's joked not about that specific case, but about other cases, and joked about, oh yeah, we're going to have to file this domestic violence order because it's not looking good financially. She said that while laughing. Since then, I've had other cases where there's a restraining order filed against my client, and now he has no place to go, so he has to sleep in his car. I had one client who was over 70 years old. One of these restraining orders was filed against him, a restraining order that we ultimately beat, and he was sleeping in his car in the meantime because he has nowhere to go. And the thing is that these temporary restraining orders, so this initial restraining order paperwork, it is based just on what somebody writes on a piece of paper. If you write severe enough things in there, basically, that when the judge looks at it, they say, okay, if everything in here is true, you're entitled to a restraining order, you automatically get this temporary one. And then once that is served, there's at least 21 days before there's a hearing, before the other side can even defend itself and get rid of this restraining order. So people are without their kids. They are without a place to live because of these restraining orders. Now, ultimately, that first client, we ended up getting everything dropped. He ended up getting custody, but it was a long road there. And, you have to wonder there too, that attorney's motivation, right? She has done a lot of these cases. She had been probably doing family law for about 30 years, at the time. She knows that ultimately the restraining order will go away. Maybe there will be some additional child support in there, but she knows it's not necessarily going to help her client long term. How much did she charge her client to file that restraining order, right? How much did she play on the emotions of that client to get the client to file the restraining order? This, by the way, is why I hate family law. I do not practice family law except for when there is an issue with restraining orders. And that's because there's a lot of overlap in domestic violence criminal cases and restraining order cases. And, I really like defeating them too. I really like when someone has been kicked out of their house, if I can finally get them back into a place to live, or which obviously then can make things awkward between the two parties. But if you are sleeping in your car and I can change that for you, I absolutely want to do that. The issues with the kids. I've had men and women come to me who got hit with one of these TROs and suddenly they can't see their babies. I think that that is wrong. It's such a messed up part of this system. If the hearing could at least be sooner, that would help. But because of that very first case, I realized this is a giant injustice. This is crazy that he's without his kids for weeks, and what recompense is there for him? Really not a whole lot. Maybe he gets some extra time to make up those days in the future, but what about the fact that he had to pay me to fight the restraining order and beat it? Maybe he can get those attorney's fees back, but not always. What about all of the stress that he was under? Anyway, so that's why I started doing domestic violence cases, and since then, I mean, I've had so many cases that reaffirm that this is what I want to be doing. It's not about necessarily defending abusers. In fact, you know, the case where we do have an actual abuser, I think is pretty rare. I think what a lot of times ends up happening is that there's a fight, there's maybe some sort of mutual combat situation. I think a lot of times even the woman will hit the man first, and he's trying to kind of restrain her. The cops come, they make the arrest first, they ask questions later. That's what a lot of these cases are about. Many times I have the alleged victim calling me saying, hey, this is hurting my family. I need to get rid of this thing. So even though at first, you know, when I tell family, friends, neighbors, people I meet what I do for a living, they're like, well, why would you do that? When you really understand it, when you experience it, when you see what I have seen and the pain that people go through because of these false accusations sometimes, when you see what's motivating people to make these accusations, it's pretty easy to do this job, and it's pretty rewarding. If you do have a criminal case in California that you need help with, or a restraining order, feel free to give me a call. You can find my number down below, and you can also just click there and schedule a consultation with me.